Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Ray Finkel. Laces out, Dan. Let's dim the lights and kick off the show.
Welcome, everybody, to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Bloodflix, streaming all your classic Italian horror films only on Bloodflix. Welcome, everybody, to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And this is a film podcast by filmmakers for everyone, I guess. We try to, bring everyone a little bit closer to how movies get made and how they're written and why things happen the way they do from a variety of standpoints. And I'm excited because today we're bringing in yet another filmmaker. I don't know if how many other filmmakers we brought on. We brought on other writers, we brought on artists, and but not necessarily anyone with an actual film degree, which neither of us have. And so I'm really excited.
This guy's he's gonna set us straight. All these episodes you've had, they're all garbage.
Terrible.
PS.
What are you doing? Yeah. I'm excited. So today we have on Ricky Holm. He's the founder of an immersive technology creative agency called Chocolate Milk and Donuts, and we'll provide a bunch of linkage in the show notes, of course. But I've been working with Ricky on and off, mostly on for maybe the past 8 years. I'm starting to lose track, man, but welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you, guys. I'm excited to be here and nerd out about some movies. I don't get to do it often enough.
That's awesome. We'll dive in. Actually, yeah, tell me a little bit. So you got a film degree in Canada. Is that still a film degree up there?
Yeah. Well, not according to the second university I went to. They did not think so highly of it. But I went to Vancouver Film School up in British Columbia and had a fantastic time there. Canada's great. They kick you out promptly after you graduate, which I found out after the fact. But great experience. And the best part about going to VFS, I think, was it's one of the most hands-on film schools that you can go to. And I think that they still hold true with that. And so, we were actually getting to shoot on Super 16 film. We got to tour the Kodak facilities there. And so it was like a really amazing experience. And I think they're kind of known in the industry as providing folks that are like ready to actually get on set and do something versus, how to read a book and tell you what it's supposed to mean. So that's exciting. And it was a great experience.
Holy crap. How long have you been running Chocolate Milk and Donuts? How did that get started? What is immersive technology?
Yes. Okay, it's a good question. So I think we just had our 5-year, we had our 5-year anniversary this year in the summer. So congrats to us making it past the 5-year mark. So excited about that. And so I got into, it's a long story, we'll keep it short, but I started VR because I was working in doing like traditional production, and a lot of it was not exciting, right? Talking head stuff, which we all do that, cut our teeth and get in the business. But I wasn't being challenged. It didn't feel like I was having to use the thinking part of my brain to do a lot of that work. And so I was looking for a new opportunity and looking for a new way to stretch my creative prowess, I guess. And so I had a mentor by the name of Andrew, who many, many years ago, as I was talking to him about, hey, I'm seeking something new, was like, hey man, what about, about this VR thing? And at the time I said, I'm not a gamer, so I don't know anything about it. I'm not interested. And he goes, well, I think that there's more to it than video games. So maybe, give it a look. And I had, my first VR experience was by a studio out of Toronto called Felix and Paul. Really, really brilliant guys. And they had created a VR or 360 video experience that you watched in a VR headset, and you were sitting in the middle of the stage, and Circus Olay performers performed a section of the circus to you. So instead of sitting in the audience, right, and having this kind of larger experience, it was a singular experience where you had people crawling up out of the orchestral pit. You had, folks coming from the ceiling, and they're pulling the floorboards up underneath you and crawling out of the stage. But it was all to you, and it was this singular and really powerful kind of presence creating experience. And I remember specifically, I took the headset off and I was on the opposite side of my bedroom from where I started. And I don't know how I did that. And I took the headset off, and I'll always remember this. I had this moment and I was just like, oh my God, this is a completely new form of storytelling, right? This is a new paradigm. And again, the phone was overheating and giving me warnings, and we're still, finding our legs in the industry. But that's what triggered me. That's what hooked me. Was that piece. And so then I started CM&D as a creative agency focused on helping people leverage this technology. And so we work with both clients big and small, that folks that have the idea, like, hey, we have this VR concept, or we want to make this really cool augmented reality experience, and we basically help them through the entire creative process, from coming up with what is that idea, how does that make sense for us as a business, and then actually developing those experiences and then getting them out in the field. So a full service immersive media agency.
Dang. So whenever you say immersive technology, are there multiple flavors of that, or does that encompass just one kind of thing?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Immersive technology is kind of a bucket term for a bunch of different stuff, and it would include technology-wise virtual reality, augmented reality, 360 video, and then another kind of term you're hearing now, which is called mixed reality. In a sense, what this is an interactive story, right? We're now giving autonomy at certain levels over to the viewer, and we're allowing the viewer to control the story in a sense. And that's really one of, I think, the biggest pivots that makes this immersive. The second part is a technology change, where most of these experiences are either viewed in a VR headset, or in some kind of augmented reality system, which is placing digital assets over the real world. So if a little picture of Wes stands up on my computer, that would be an augmented reality version of yours truly. And so all of these different technologies, which get confused a lot in the media as well, all kind of fall in that same bucket of immersive technology. So these interactive kind of technology-based experiences, I guess would be the best way I could describe that without using the word in the description.
So is the difference between virtual reality and augmented reality is like if, on Amazon, if you want to see what a desk looks like in your room, right? Then it'll put the desk, it like analyzes the room, and it'll put the desk in your corner or wherever you place it in the actual room. But then virtual reality it's just creating the entire space. Is that correct?
Yeah, the simplest way to think about it is VR is like a magic blindfold, right? So we're completely blocking out reality, and we're stepping into a new place. Whereas augmented reality is we are augmenting the world around us. So that could be a face filter, where I'm wearing a Santa Claus hat in the middle of September when it's still 90 degrees out in Texas. Or, you're seeing what a new teapot looks like on your kitchen counter.
Gotcha. Okay.
And what's the difference? You mentioned a term earlier called 360 video. What's the difference between in 360 and VR? I assume you're generally the best experience is going to be with a virtual reality headset. But what's the difference between those two types of presentations?
Yeah, another good question. So yes, those experiences are best normally viewed in a VR headset, right? That's the most, it's like watching a new Christopher Nolan film in the theater, right? That's where it's designed to watch. Yeah, it still plays well on your cell phone, but it's not the same experience. And VR is the same way. We develop both 360 video and VR experiences with the headset viewing experience in mind. 360 video is just what it sounds like. It's 360 degree video that's actually capturing real life things. So we're filming humans and locations and explosions and all that fun stuff. Whereas normally the term virtual reality is reserved for like rendered content. So think about stepping inside of a video game like Halo, right? That's not a real filmed environment, that's rendered inside of a computer game engine.
Nice. And I suppose one other additional factor would be the interactivity. Virtual reality usually also means that you're going to be able to interact with the content you're watching, even if it is maybe a rendered video. Like we're working on a project right now that is going to include some of these interactive components where you point and click and something happens as a result of what you chose. A different video plays, or there's branching narratives. Would you consider that to be virtual reality, or still purely 360?
No, I think you're getting into a gray area, right? Where it's if you and it was funny that you bring this up because early on in the industry, there was a any Reddit rabbit hole that you want to go down, there's these huge debates of is 360 video virtual reality or is it not? And at the end of the day, I think it's the yes and no, right? You can add interactivity to virtual reality, which is a key component that helps create presence. Because at the end of the day, I think that's what we want to do, right? This new form of storytelling it's not just putting a 2D video in a headset, right? That it's about creating a new type of storytelling and a new experience for the end user. And the way that you make that experience more immersive and more presence creating is through the use of things like, interactive audio. So if I look this way, right, what's happening over here, or if I trigger something, right? There's a couple of really great 360 videos I've seen that they won't start playing certain aspects of the film until you look at it. And that's still 360 video, but there's interactivity. So is that VR or isn't it? And so again, I think it's a deciding whatever you want that definition to be. Yeah.
Nice. Well, we'll dive in more as we continue. But the reason you're here is kind of a convenient way of covering this other movie, or really, this movie was a conduit to bring you onto the show. What are we going to cover today?
Today we're covering Ready Player One directed by Steven Spielberg. So if you haven't seen it, please pause this episode and go watch it because we're going to spoil a lot of stuff.
For sure. We'll talk about a few things. We'll touch on some of the cinematography, packing out the frame and cheating for the camera. We'll lightly look at some of the story and writing elements. And of course, Ricky's going to weigh in on the movie itself, as well as the things they get right and wrong about virtual reality and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of the film. When the creator of a virtual reality called The Oasis dies, he makes a posthumous challenge to all Oasis users to find his Easter egg, which will give the finder his fortune and control of his world. Directed by Steven Spielberg, screenplay by Zach Penn and Ernie Klein, based on the book by Ernie Klein, cinematography by Janice Kaminsky, starring Ty Sheridan as Wade and Parzival, Olivia Cook as Sam and Artemis, Ben Mendelsohn as Sorrento, Lena Waithe as H, TJ Miller as IROC, Simon Pegg as Ogden Morrow and the Curator, Mark Rylance as Halliday and Anorak, Philip Zhao as Sho, Win Morisaki as Daito, and Hannah John Komen as Finale.
I was born in 2027, after the corn syrup droughts, after the bandwidth riots, after people stopped trying to fix problems and just tried to outlive them. My parents, they didn't make it through those times, so I live here in Columbus, Ohio with my Aunt Alice. In 2045, Columbus is the fastest growing city on Earth. It's where Halliday and Morrow started gregarious games. These days, reality is a bummer. Everyone's looking for a way to escape. And that's why he was such a hero to us. He showed us that we could go somewhere without going anywhere at all. You don't need a destination when you're running on an omnidirectional treadmill with quadraphonic pressure-sensitive underlay. James Halliday saw the future, and then he built it. He gave us a place to go. A place called The Oasis.
So, I mean, there's kind of an interesting conversation that they're kind of having, especially in that little clip about the people who are looking to escape the world or fix the world, as opposed to now they're just trying to outlive the problems. And so there's this undercurrent that kind of creeps throughout the entire film about, are we just abandoning reality in favor of this make-believe? Or is the make-believe reality creating something of value aside from what it's doing to the rest of the world? And I don't know that they really come to an answer or anything. But all that stuff aside, Todd, you're pretty hot and cold, mostly cold on recent Spielberg of the last 15 years or so. So I'm curious. I don't expect this to have been like your favorite movie or even mostly likable. I am just curious, was there moments that you liked, or did you actually like this movie? Correct me if I'm getting that assumption wrong. But
Oh, you know me. Okay, so the first time I saw the film, I had the same feeling the first time I saw the film, which was at the beginning, I was trying to brace myself because I'd never read Ready Player One. I didn't know what I was walking into. It was like totally cold. So, the pop culture thing, I figured, okay, this is part of the book, the 80s thing. Like everybody loves the 80s, apparently 100 years later. And, which is fine. But like hair bands and stuff, I'm like, okay, fine. I'll just go with it, whatever. And it was fine. I actually really enjoyed probably the first half of it. I felt the same seeing it in the theater. I thought this is, visually it's so cool. The race shots and the race scene was just amazing with Kong and everything. I was like, because it's supposed to look gamey, right? It's not supposed to like look super realistic. And so to that effect, it was perfect. I thought it was amazing the whole time. But then story-wise, I just got so turned off when we got back to the real world and we met everybody. The acting was really, really bad to me. Like really bad. The writing was just as bad. And then the ending was like very confusing. I mean, people keep coming in and out of the truck. They keep closing the door, and then like Morrow comes back twice, and then the cops come in, and then they close the door. I'm like, what is going on? It was just very confusing at the end. So I thought I had the same feeling that I did the first time I saw it, which was the first half is fantastic, and I was at the edge of my seat, and I loved it. And I couldn't wait for them to find another key and everything. But it also felt like it felt like the finding of the keys came a little easy to Parzival, and so for example, so the first one I was like, oh, that's really cool. And I can totally see everyone missing that. Right. But then the second one, which was when I think wasn't the second one where they went into The Shining.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
That was so confusing to me. You just got to jump onto the floating ghosts. Like that's the thing. Like, and she knows that. It was very confusing to me. Didn't make much sense. Which is fine. That's not really a Spielberg thing. But the problem that I had was when we went, like I said before, into the real world, we met all the real people, and like the acting was just not good. And the lighting, I don't know what the deal is. I don't understand. Okay. I just need to take a breath here real fast.
While you're thinking about that, Todd, I have a quick question. Have you since read the book or not?
No, but
Okay,
because
all right.
here's the deal.
Just curious.
Because here's the deal. Like it's a great story. I can tell you that if I read the book, I would love it. I totally would. I think I really would. But what I'm trying to convey right now is the filmmaking aspect of it that I don't understand how someone like Spielberg, who is a modern day genius and has made some of the most seminal works of anyone's time. I mean, Schindler's List, Jaws, Jurassic Park, like Indiana Jones. I could go on for days. Can start making movies where it feels like the lighting is so like an afterthought almost. It's just like hey, throw a light over there. I can't see him very well in the camera. Throw a light over there. Okay, cool. Let's go. There's no real, it doesn't feel like there's real thought to like the purpose for things. I see spotlights everywhere all the time, as opposed to when it's going to highlight some aspect of the story that's being told, or the line that's being said, or the situation they're in. It's just all the time. And it really bothers me, and it takes me out of it because I notice it. I mean, I know we don't talk about other movies in here, but like The Post is another great example of that, where it was like, what is happening? I don't understand. And I mean, I understand the story, but I don't understand why I'm looking at what I'm looking at. And that's how I felt again. It was like the first half was fantastic and I was on the edge of my seat, and then it just lost me and it never got me back. In fact, I just kept going down this whole like I don't know, this whole rabbit hole of like asking questions of why that, and why did they think that was a good take? That was terrible. That line was awful. Even if they had to say the line, couldn't they take a better take or something? Anyway, I'm going to stop there. But that's how I felt. I felt gypped after the first half of it. Yeah.
Ricky, so you did read the book.
Yeah.
Multiple times.
Three times.
Mm-hmm. And you're the one who passed it over to me, and I read it. Now I read it after I'd seen it in theaters already. And so I wasn't super excited to dive into it. But I ended up like loving the book. It's just such a breezy read. And it really gives a lot more satisfaction, because I agree, man, a lot of the adventuring, the clue hunt isn't always very satisfying in terms of the experience for the viewer, right? Clues and reveals, right? We're really just passengers in that. And so outside, I really do. I like the race at the beginning, because that's a really good thrill. They set it up initially with a big failure. And so the second time we experience it, it heightens that whole experience, and we don't know if it's going to work or not. And then it happens, and it feels right. It feels like, oh, we gained something through this. But the rest, I don't know, especially the Shining one. I just feel like the thrills aren't maybe great enough, and we don't have the info to solve the puzzles ourselves. And so it just seems like a very passive experience that's just there to kind of enjoy a lot of the pop culture references. Especially in the second one. I have different thoughts, I think, with adventure, because that's its own little bottle. But I'm curious, Ricky, if the movie is good enough for you to like enjoy it and kind of recall the fun of the book, or if you enjoy it for different reasons or hate it for entirely different reasons. I don't know. I don't know if you even like this movie.
So I think we were chatting about this the other day, right? And I think I mentioned I continue to maybe enjoy it less and less every time I see it. And so I made the mistake of, I think this is the case with a lot of films, right? If you read the book first, there's a good chance you're going to be let down by the movie. Yeah. There's very few books or movies that hold up to the quality of the book. And so this is another one of those. And I think, I agree with you, Todd. Like the beginning is so good. Even the way they set the stage, like with the stacks, right? How they have this like not even post-apocalyptic, but just like part of what we were listening to there in that opening clip was like talking about how, we're just trying to outlive our problems and just disappear into this. And then when you see those opening shots of like these stacked up mobile homes on these rickety frames, to me is like, oh my God, that's exactly what I imagined in the book. Like it did a great job.
Oh, cool.
Again, in that lighting, that scene as well, it's like, I don't know who is color correcting it, but it's fine. And I thought that beginning of it sets the stage really well. And I was watching it again yesterday in preparation for this conversation. And I also really love the way that they show the way that VR they explain what VR is, and they answer some of the questions that you guys were chatting about at the beginning, right? As Parzival's, or Wade, I guess at that time, is climbing down the stacks, all of his background are all of these people doing different VR activities. And it aligns, and I think it does a really good job of teaching the audience, I understand VR now. I get it. It's this new world I can step into, and I can go surfing, or I can, be a stripper, or I can do whatever it is that I want to do. And then again, the race is fantastic, and the amount of cultural references that they get into that race, which only Spielberg could do this, and we'll get into that potentially later on why I think that only someone like Spielberg could do this movie, for good or for bad. But the amount of pop culture stuff that they slice into the race in itself is phenomenal. They've got the T-Rex from, Jurassic Park. They've got Kong. They've got, Bigfoot, the monster truck. I mean, anyone who grew up in the 80s and 90s knows what Bigfoot is, the monster truck, right? And so that's all fantastic. And then, I liked to me, it's almost like they ran out of budget or time to finish writing the second Key Hunt. Because I think the Shining thing is great.
Great idea.
Totally. I mean, it's scary and it's freaky and it brings you back. So again, if you grew up in that era, if you ever like stole a copy of The Shining from your parents when they weren't looking and watched it or something, it freaked you out. Yeah. And so they did a good job, I think, of doing that. But then again, to your point, it's like all of a sudden it's like, wait, so this woman that been in love with for eternity is making her dance with zombies in eternity in this thing. And so it was a little confusing and strange. And I'm trying to think, I haven't read the book in a while. I don't remember feeling that way, or I don't remember feeling kind of let down by the hunt in the book, right? They kept that tension really well, and you weren't sure if Parzival was going to make it, right? If he was going to be the one to find the key, and they kept that heightened tension. And so anyway, they definitely, that falls off in the film, especially near the end.
In the book, does Artemis find the second key, or is that a film thing, or was it Parzival?
You know what? It might have been Parzival. It might have been Artemis. I can't really remember. One of the things that was, I think, smart, and I appreciate them trying to add something new to the movie experience for the readers. And I think that's the whole point of going away with some of the treasure hunts from the book, right? But one of the interesting things that the book did with like the opening treasure hunt was to reveal a little bit about Halliday, the creator of the Oasis, through the way he inserted the hunt itself, because one thing that's left out of the movie version is how hard it is to travel from one area of Oasis to another. Like, that costs money.
That's right.
And so in the book, they emphasize, he wanted to level the playing field so that if you were broke and poor, you had a chance to win this as well. And that's implemented through the use of finding the first key, being on a particular kind of planet that's accessible even to the kids. And so that was one of the cool things. And then the second clue was like pantomiming a movie. I forget which movie, and I can't remember if that was Artemis or not, but there was that element of they're helping each other. They're accidentally clanning up or just not admitting out loud. And so I think they still keep that element in there. But yeah, I'm same as Ricky. I'm having a trouble like picking that up. But I agree with Ricky. Like, I think you said it really well. That opening exposition is flawless. Like, they spend the first 10 to 12 minutes catching the audience up to speed, right, about what VR is, what the Oasis is, the way it operates, who the main characters are, the purpose of the Easter egg hunt, and while introducing us to Halliday and everyone else. Like, that's a pretty flawless and seamless, breezy 12 minutes of exposition that's hard to pull off, and that's one of the better sections of the movie. And I agree with Todd. The more we're in the real world, the less I like the film. The more we're spending time in the Oasis, which may be intentional, right? Because that's the experience of the people in this universe. They don't want to be in the real world either. They want to be in the Oasis. And so maybe it's a way of getting us to abandon. I don't know if that really serves a story function.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm, now that you're talking, Wes, the book is coming back to me. You've triggered some thoughts, and the end of the book, I remember liking it because it, Ogden Morrow, right, Halliday's partner, he becomes more involved, right? Mm-hmm. And there's certain rules that he's not allowed to break. Yeah. Or he can't, or it'll like, it just, the way the game has been developed, but he becomes, there's a bit more of like they still use the orb of Ocelox or whatever, like that's a component from the book, but they're having more trouble in the real world, and it becomes a little like more raw in the book, and they end up flying out into like the middle of nowhere, and like, the Ogden Morrow like has more involvement in the book. In the film, he's almost like an afterthought. He's kind of a weird character, and like you said at the end, Todd, it's very confusing. Right? How all of a sudden they just like, the cops just like give a shit, and like it's just like, it's very, what the hell's going on? The end of the book is not like that. And again, I don't know if it's a budget thing, or if they just were rushing to get it out, or if they
time constraints.
Spielberg just didn't care. I don't know.
I feel like this is the kind of film that would unfortunately serve best as like a limited series, right? A 10 episode thing. Because one of the problems that I had is emotional buy-in. And when you're trying to get through so much exposition and so much story and so many characters, it gets really hard to create all the stakes that you want, right? The real world versus the Oasis. Because what they want is for what happens in VR to matter in the real world, in reality. And so they're trying to create these life and death consequences, right? And they constantly are showing you why things that are happening in reality are impacting inversely into the Oasis, right? The car chase that interplays with the final sequence of him unlocking the keys and all that. And I think they're just trying to do a little too much, and we need to care more about the characters and the survival of the Oasis, and hate the cartoony villain that's trying to spoil it, as well as murder our heroes. So I don't know. It's just they're spreading themselves thin. The stakes just don't really grab you, and ultimately it just kind of comes off as a I don't want to say cheap, but as a very simple play on just enjoy inhabiting a bunch of pop culture references. Like that's ultimately what it comes off as, a slick version of creating all these simple, kitschy references, which it works. I mean, my first time watching this, ultimately, I walked out pretty happy. I was like, that was fun. I got to, hang out with a bunch of random 80s, 90s, and 70s references, some of which were before my time, but because they're so popular, right, you can't help but be familiar with them, whether it's, I don't know, The Shining or probably 1,000 things that I didn't pick up. But yeah, I think that's kind of the Achilles here. Whereas if you spent 10 hours where you're just slowly evolving some of these things and like hinting at the way Artemis has her own show, right, in the book, right? She's this popular pop culture figure herself, and she has a following, and that adds to her mystique a lot more, instead of just a girl that he sees kind of across the room, and he tries to build her up in one or two sentences, like that was Artemis, and H is like, the Artemis, and it's like, that's as much as we can really cram into this 2-hour 20-minute movie, as opposed to like, hey, let's let some of these things breathe, and we know about her way before we get to actually meet her. Now you can start to build in mystique and some of these elements that I think are just not helping us land emotionally with the consequences of everything that's going to unfold.
Yeah, and we know Spielberg can do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like Band of Brothers. I mean, he can do stuff over long spans of time. I love that idea. That would have been awesome. I would have loved to have like an episode every Friday, kind of like how Apple TV does.
I am curious, Ricky. You said you had a bunch of. You said when you were watching it this time, you were picking out a bunch of, that's so Spielberg, or just elements of Spielbergian.
Please share from your
Please
educated
share.
mind instead of my just.
Well, so I come again. I'm probably, I'm more of a producer now than I am anything else, and so I think about a lot of stuff through a business lens. And one of the things, again, that you go back to this opening scene, and this is what I meant earlier, where I said that only Spielberg could do this, is you look at and they did a fantastic job of this, and that's with the opening scene, with the Shining thing, with all of it, is they do such a phenomenal job of pulling in all these pop culture references. And you have to think about, like, legally, how tricky is that? They had Warner Brother cartoons. They had movies from Paramount. They had pulled stuff from the last 50 years of cinema and TV, and somehow gotten the rights to smash it all in, not including all the music that they used. And I think they had, right, that was a Van Halen song, or that was at the beginning of this, and it's just it's that's probably a benefit and a curse of the type of industry we live in now, where everything is consolidated.
That's a great point. Is that why they ran out of money at the end?
Right. They have these phenomenal, and so I don't know, whatever it's, I don't know what the budget of this film is. I'm sure it was a lot, but I bet a good chunk of it was just, and I think about that because what other, this was the best setup for a, why am I blanking on his name, but a Jack Nicklaus cameo ever.
Oh yeah.
In the history of filmmaking. Like, why does he not break through a door? I mean, they set it up. They start banging that, he pokes the hole in the door with an axe, and you're waiting for Jack Nicklaus to poke his head through and say something, and they never do it. And so I always think with myself, like, well, that was an agent that was probably being a little too snickery, or a little too picky on their budget to get Jack in there, and they weren't willing to pay his fee. But they do, that was one of the things that I noticed this time is how. I think they did a great job. Spielberg did a great job of being able to execute and pull all of these pop cultural references together, and even some tooting his own horn again with like the shot of the T-Rex from some of his own films. And so anyway, I really enjoyed that the second time. I got a little kick out of that. It's almost like I felt like I was sitting back with Spielberg next to me laughing, being like, yeah, I see what you did there. That's fun. And so I think if you look at the film more from that perspective, where if you go back to some of his early work, right, he wasn't established as a modern day genius yet, right? And so now that he has, right, I wonder if this is a little bit more, kind of like popcorn movie type thing, where it's like, we're just gonna have some fun with this, and the book was cute, and we're just gonna lean into that. And we're not gonna worry about creating a huge emotional connection with the audience here, because he kind of doesn't have to do that anymore. He can get away with these fun, just have a good time. Just go have a good time.
I looked it up. The budget was $175 million.
Oh, that actually seems low.
Yeah, for a movie like
relatively,
this, it feels low.
And again, you don't know too, like, I forget how everything is structured now in terms of all these studios, but Spielberg kind of owns a very large portion of like the entire movie business. And so if he's pulling, and I haven't thought about the actors in this film as well that ties into this, but if he's pulling, a lot of these licensed visuals from his own, collection of whatever property he owns now, then that also is, for you and I, this would have cost $1 billion to make, because we would have been paying someone like Spielberg to put his T-Rex in it, or whatever the case might be. Which, and I don't want to jump too quickly ahead or into a different topic, but that was something else I was thinking about yesterday that, and I'm trying to think of another good Spielberg movie to reference. I had one this morning, but it seems like, Spielberg's done a good job of being able to make blockbuster films without A-list actors. And I find that really interesting. Whereas there's some great actors in this film, but if you go look at the catalog of the other films, I mean, this isn't a Brad Pitt, right? This isn't, that type or that level of actor. And he's done that on and off in some of his other films. Again, I even like Jurassic Park. I don't think any of those folks that was kind of some of their breakout roles when they did that. And so Spielberg has this way of being able to find actors that are able to play the parts, whether in Todd's opinion well or not, and still make successful, and I mean now I'm talking about it from a business perspective, financially successful films. And, people pay with their people whatever rate movies with their wallet, if you want to say it that way. And so I was thinking about that too last night, where I think I mentioned to Wes, prior to this, that I was trying to figure out who the girl was. It's like, how come I recognize her? And she's in like Sound of Metal, which again, not to get off track, but like that's a phenomenal movie inside and out, and from a filmmaker's and storytelling perspective. But again, outside of that, she's, and I forget her name. I had a list of them pulled up
Olivia
here,
Cook,
right?
Yeah.
But Olivia, she's not like a huge, massive star. And so anyway, I just found that interesting that Spielberg has a way of creating these massive blockbuster films without maybe following always the traditional route of Hollywood filmmaking.
And I bet it has something to do with
selection.
the concept, right? The subject matter, because when people are showing up for, we're coming to this because it's a crazy VR video game pop culture phenomenon, or there's dinosaurs, we're there for the dinosaurs, then to some degree maybe not having A-listers is a feather in your cap, because you can support the story a lot stronger now and let these other things be the centerpiece.
Great point.
Interesting.
And that, and plus it's cheaper. Like there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, like can you imagine Tom Cruise in Jurassic Park?
Right.
No. Do you know what I mean? Or something like that? Yeah. Like Brad Pitt? Like no, that's not gonna fly. I don't even know if he's acting back then, but anyway, good point.
For sure. Like
that is interesting. That's a great point, Wes. I wouldn't have thought about that.
We can touch a little bit on cinematography. Like there's some very simple, very standard, and to me it's also very Spielbergian things that he does, right? A lot of atmosphere, the haze, especially in the intro when he's putting on the headset, it's just pumped with full of haze, right? This little smoky substance that you kind of fan out throughout the room, so that when you create this backlighting, It creates these light streaks. And it's beautiful. He loves that kind of stuff. It's not in every one of his shots for sure, but it's something that it's very old industry pro. But I think the other stuff that to me is even more, him, is the way he packs the frame. Now, this works in almost any type of filmmaking you want to do, whether it's standard 2D like this, but more is usually more. Like sometimes you hear people say less is more, especially for an adventure film. More in the frame usually is a better payoff. The more stuff that you can have happening, like actors crossing the screen, stuff inside the frame, boxes and layers and depth. And the reason I even made this note was we were watching, it's towards the end of the film, and Sorrento's on the phone with Finale, and he's telling her like, kill the kids or whatever, villainous thing he's commanding. And it's a close up of him, but over his shoulder in the background, we see an actor walk across the screen. And I was just like, that's hilarious. This is just one line of dialogue. But he is not going to miss a moment to create extra motion or something interesting within the frame. And it's because more often than not, and maybe even especially with VR, more usually gets you more, as long as you know why you want more. There's times whenever you definitely want less in order to emphasize something else that's happening on screen. But with Spielberg, the more he can cram in, I think he's usually happiest that way. And similarly, like, he does a lot of cheating for the camera, and this is something all of us filmmakers do. But it's a common film trick, right? We're going to cheat perspective in order to achieve a result to help tell the story for the viewer, right? So if you think about the race sequence, whenever he stops and everyone goes and he's about to decide to go backwards, there's something happening in this that he emphasizes through like 4 or 5 shots, which is everyone at the starting line takes off except Parzival, and we see everyone move away. We see him in one scene just kind of stay as we fly away, and then we see a side view mirror of Artemis's motorcycle, and he's large in the frame, and then he shrinks away. Now, if we're talking about a linear reality, right? By the time we cut to that scene, that shot of him in the side view mirror, he should have already been way smaller, right? This has been several seconds, and these cars are going from 0 to 100 in like 0.5 seconds. And so, but in order to sell the shot and to sell the idea, like, he kind of rewinds time to a certain degree so that the frame shows him large in the side view mirror, because the side view mirror is already tiny in the frame. And the last thing you want is to try to communicate this feeling that she's seeing something happening that's catching her attention, that's drawing our attention. And you need to just kind of cheat a little bit in order to sell the idea, even if it's not linearly true. And similarly, we see those kind of ideas of, several times. Artemis, when she gets locked up into her little prison cell, she sees in her VR headset one of her other subjugates gets shocked, right? They're not moving fast enough. Yeah, right. And he gets shocked. And then we cut to the reality of her in her cage, and then the person right next to her gets shocked, and they fall down and hit their knees or whatever. Now, that's not really how VR works, in the sense of that guy could have been anywhere. Like, he didn't have to be right next to her just because he was right next to her in VR. Like, those are two completely disconnected realities. But in order to sell the idea that what's happening in VR is also having a real world effect, he just happened to set this person right next to her cell. And that's just a very simple cheat that the audience is never going to think twice about, because all we're trying to do is communicate something to the viewer, and the reality doesn't really make sense, and it's never going to be called into question. I don't think there's anybody in the industry better than Spielberg at cheating perspective. And similarly, in the final battle, Chucky, right, gets thrown into this crowd, and he kills a bunch of people. And then we cut to the war room, the IOI, and there's like a cluster of red deaths. And same thing, right? Godzilla falls and lands on a strip of IOI people, and then we cut to, you know, reality, and a strip of IOI people, you know, red out and die. Like that, those things, there's no reason that just because they're seated next to each other in the room that they would actually be seated next to each other on the battlefield. That's just not how the whole system works. But it's doing something to create an effect for the viewer, and it's satisfying, and it's super fast. He's not giving you time to think about it or question it, right? It's just there to create a moment. And it's just simple, genius visual storytelling at its best. Similarly, and in a different way, cheating for the camera, holding a frame. This is something that I ride a little bit differently, but it's something that most big budget mainstream storytellers do, because you're trying to communicate to, for lack of a better phrase, the dumbest audience member. And this is where, like, Finale, the villain, gets into their van as they're doing this chase sequence, right? And she pulls out her gun and then holds the gun for like eternity while Dido winds up a kick and knocks the gun out of her hand, right? And so she gets in, she frames this moment, and then we cut to Dido as he sees what happens, and then he winds up a kick. Like, she could have blasted all of them in that amount of time, but all you're doing, right, is holding this frame so that you could cut around and show how everything's unfolding without making it go too fast so that someone in the audience misses exactly what's happening. That's common tactics, but I usually write it a little bit closer to the speed of reality, depending on the project and the film and the purpose and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, those
that all makes a lot of sense. I never even thought about, you know, they don't need to be next to each other in reality, even if they're next to each other in virtual reality. That is brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. The gun situation at the end is lazy. Is absolutely, it drives me up the wall when I watch movies where that shit happens. It makes me insane. Like, that would never happen. If you're trying to tell me a story in reality, show me reality. You know, like, and I don't mean reality as we know it now. I mean reality as in, like, if I have a gun and I want to shoot you, I'm going to shoot you. You are not, there's no amount of kicking or speed that you could possibly have to stop that. I'm going to shoot you unless you're Bruce Lee or Jackie Chan, which you are not, so you are dead. And that's the thing.
And the thing that they could have done differently, if he wanted to, would be to compose that into a single shot, into a single frame. That way you can keep the speed legit while telling all those bits and pieces of information. And so if maybe instead of these close-ups, you could have gone to like a medium wide that you're able to insert both of these things all at once. And
then it makes him look like a badass.
Yeah. Like he's,
you know, and it
in
makes
real
me
time.
feel like I'm watching a real fight, you know? Anyway. Yeah. It's a good point.
I'm glad, you know, Spielberg needs to learn from us how to really make a movie.
You know, that's the thing. I'm sitting here thinking, and I'm saying all this stuff, and I know that I've been shitting on Spielberg for a couple of years now, and it's a terrible thing, because who the hell am I? I am no one. No. And anyone who listen to this, you know, like, I'm nobody, but I am also the opinion. Right. Yeah. I'm also the one, me and millions of other people are the ones that are going to remember his legacy, are the ones that are going to say this guy was the best ever. So if I watch Tom Brady playing football and he throws 2 interceptions in the final 2 drives of the Super Bowl and loses the game, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Yeah. You're not the best. Yeah. You know, that's just bottom line. And so if you make movies like this,
it's okay to point that out. That's our function.
Yeah,
as
it's
the
okay
audience.
to say, dude, you shat the bed, bro. You're better than this.
Yeah.
You know, revisit Schindler's List, revisit Jurassic Park. You know, where did the dinosaur come from? These questions are things that, like, you created. You are the mastermind that said, you know what? You know, screen left.
Yeah.
And nobody thinks about it. So you're brilliant. So let's see that brilliance. Even, you know, when you get older and you start making, you know, movies like Ready Player One, where you can use this kind of stuff. And anyway, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting that you guys bring that up, right? Because I think there's a fine line, or there's a difference maybe between, like, again, Wes, I didn't think about what you said earlier. And it's a brilliant storytelling tactic, right? Where when Kong at the end collapses and kills all those or Sixers, and it shows the room go with the red lights. Again, why would they be standing next to each other? And that doesn't make sense. But as from a storytelling tactic, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
Right. And that is really interesting to see. And I understand, if you go to the van scene, what you guys are talking about, yes, that mean woman or whoever she is, right? The kind of bad lady. Finale. She could have killed everybody or just shot the driver right away and like the van would have crashed and the movie would have been over. Yeah. And so, but is that
tonally, this is a different movie, right? This is Goonies. This isn't Munich. So
exactly. And that's what I was gonna say. Is like playing to your audience, right? Yeah. You got to set it up, and I think what Daito or something is like a kid.
Yeah.
And this is like some like hardened badass bitch that's been around forever, and it's like she's like a professional hitman for the world's most evil corporation. Like it doesn't matter if you kick her one time, she's probably just gonna be like, okay. Boom, you're dead. Yeah. But again, this is probably a movie that wasn't necessarily designed for the same crowd who's going to go see Sicario.
So it's so great because we just did that last week. Was there ever a moment for either of you guys in this film where you actually physically rolled your eyes, or did you just like digest it all?
I
think
it
was Ricky. Sorry, yeah.
I just the end is so bad, and I was joking with Wes that I was watching it last night, and right up until the final scene, I was watching it on HBO, and HBO just crashed, and I was like, it's late, I'm going to bed, and I didn't actually rewatch the final scene. I know what happens, but it's just like they just get out of the van, and there's like a crowd of people cheering, and they're just like, you've said, it's like, no, but what is that? Like, that's such a shit, just like, and like,
Yeah.
And so I had a hard time with that. I literally rolled my eyes. Okay. And there's a couple of, I think, VR technical things where I see them happening and I kind of roll my eyes, but I'd have to think about an example.
I want to dial into that here in a second. To answer your question, Todd, I think my big eye roll was the whole he left his password on his rig. Like, that's just a little too easy for our heroes. Like, I get what you're trying to do,
That's right. And that scene in the book is so good. Yeah. It's so good how they actually hack that. So it's a whole different flip situation. Parzival is, because if you remember, these guys go into indentured, right? They get picked up for having debt or whatever. And so he purposefully goes into debt and allows himself to be captured because he kind of becomes a recluse. Like, he becomes so obsessed that he like cuts the world off and like welds his apartment door shut and like goes into this really dark place. And at the end of that, he basically, the whole time, you find this out after the fact, is he's setting himself up to be captured. And when he gets inside of the IOI complex, he's got all these little crumbs laid out so he can, from the inside, hack his way into the system. And it's much more interesting than what they do. I know, exactly, Todd. It's such an interesting part of the book, and it gets dark, and you think he's not going to make it, and it's like really like he's shaven. It reminds you of like the opening scene of Matrix when he falls out of that sack of fluid, and it's like this really dark kind of place we go, and it's great.
It's so good.
And that's how he hacks in.
It's great. And then they have these other little layers where he's also like understanding, I need to work on my physical health. And so he implements a lock on the game that forces him to exercise before he can actually get back into the Oasis.
Oh, that's right.
And it controls his calorie counts. And
I'm even more mad now. I'm going to go read the book. I don't know how you guys are watching this movie, telling me this and thinking that this could be good at all. It seems like the best aspects of it were left out.
It's so breezy. I think once you get started after like 3 or 4 chapters, you're like, a little bit, and you're just done. Okay. All of a sudden it's over.
I'm going to go read it now.
It's a pretty satisfying read. So before we get into some of the more tech savvy elements, I'm curious, were there any fun pop culture moments that you particularly enjoyed? So for me, like, I think my favorite moment would be the alien chestburster scene, right? Where the Mortal Kombat character, right? And she like bursts out and she like kind of chews through it. And then I just love how she also ends it where she's just kind of tapping her teeth. Yeah. Like, that to me is really fun. The Zemeckis cube, he solves it, right? And then they play this little quick Back to the Future audio clip twinkle, and that's
Honestly, I missed
genius. There's others, but I'm just curious, were there any standout little fun moments for y'all?
Me? Okay. I wasn't sure. That's a really great question. I loved that aliens moment because I forgot about it. I forgot that it was Artemis, and until that happened, and I realized when it bursted out, I was like, oh my God, what? And then she like carves the figure off of herself, and it reveals her. So I loved that, actually. That was really good. But I think honestly, probably the race, just because there was so much in it, like the first race when he loses, just because there was so much in it, and it felt really awesome, really intense, and I loved all seeing the T-Rex. I remember the T-Rex was the first like obvious one for me, where because I knew Spielberg directed it, and I thought, oh man, yeah, that's awesome. Okay, brings me back. That's really cool. So yeah, I would say the race more than anything.
So I picked up one last night that was interesting. I'd never noticed it before. So I second what you say, Todd. The beginning of it's so fun, right? The opening 15 minutes of the movie, just put it on loop. It's fine.
Yeah.
But in the final battle, when they're trying to, when they have that orb kind of blocking everybody out, and they basically call, right? They call all of the entire Oasis to come help, right? Hey, come save us. And you get some some interesting stuff in there. But there was one scene last night where there's this group of guys, and I don't know what the name of the dude from Halo is, if he actually has a name.
Master Chief.
Yeah, he
Master
does.
Chief. Yeah.
Oh, what is it?
Master Chief.
Master Chief, that's right.
Master Chief. Okay, there's like a group of like 6 or 8 Master Chiefs running together, and then they cut to a real life shot, and it's a bunch of like nerdy gamer kids running down the street, and it just brought me back. So I was like, wow, that was a fun little Halo reference, considering that it was like very stereotypical, a bunch of like nerdy young men like playing Halo that are also then playing Halo, and they're a group of Halo, and it was just I kind of picked that up last night. I was like, oh, that's cute.
That's awesome.
So I don't know if that was my favorite. But that was a good one.
I mean, a great visual is like the Iron Giant fighting Godzilla. That's really enjoyable, as well as the little Terminator 2 thumbs up.
The Terminator. Oh, that was so great. So I love you're bringing that back. Yeah, that was really great.
And I really did appreciate that final Easter egg, because Adventure is famed for that among a certain group, I guess. Adventure, the Atari game, having that little Easter egg. I really appreciated that, because I remember that as a kid. I was probably, I don't know, all of 2 or 3 years old the first time I saw that. I was confused as hell about what was happening, and what my brother and a couple of his friends were playing Atari, and they were trying to execute this Easter egg, and I didn't know what they were doing or why they were doing it, or even what they found whenever it popped up on screen. I was like, this is very strange art. I couldn't digest that this was words. It just looked like the game errored out to me. I was like, oh, it's broken. But kind of seeing that discussed and on screen, I was like, oh, that's really freaking cool, because I too have some vague light memory of that in my own childhood. And so I appreciate them, and the little conversation. It gets quiet. Everyone's watching, and he's discussing the importance of the creator being recognized. And I was like, oh yeah, that's worthy. That's a worthy little conversation that they're having, I think. But all that aside, I would be curious, switching gears slightly, VR 360 filmmaking. So we do a lot of this, right? I serve as your creative director for Chocolate Milk and Donuts. And so we are constantly working on projects. I'm curious what you would best practices, like give me some of the rules of 360 filmmaking that maybe they don't adhere to very well in this movie, especially. I think they try, but sometimes it's like, I don't know if they're like, the movement is a very finicky one, for instance. But what would you consider some of the rules of 360 filmmaking?
Well, that the rules of 360 filmmaking are one thing, but I think the when it comes to the movie, right? That's the one that was part of what caught me was what we call teleportation, right? And so the way that the inner ear, right, and that's a problem in VR, is teleportation, aka is how we move, right? So if we want to move the viewer, I'm sitting on a couch right here, right? If I want to get up and move to a kitchen in VR, how do we do that? Because VR creates this sense of presence in your mind, so your brain actually thinks what's happening is real. And that's a very kind of just, they don't really say that in the film, but they just almost imply that it's virtual reality. I think we all make that leap. But when you actually do it and you get up, or you see a lot of it where people are flying and they're falling over and they're, doing all this stuff in the movie, which looks good on camera, that's a really big problem in actual virtual reality creation is how do you allow a human being whose our brain is thinking about trying to figure out if I'm walking at my normal walking speed and the world is going by at twice that speed, my brain goes, wait a minute, there's something wrong, right? Your inner ear is being tricked, and then what happens is you get motion sick, right? You literally get physically sick, and that was a big problem actually very early on in VR. And so it's interesting. I was watching it last night again, and I was looking at, sometimes they do a really good job, and they talk about the omnidirectional treadmill at the beginning of the film, and then partway through the movie, it's almost like they give that up. And it's like these guys are running and leaping and jumping and doing all this stuff in the VR, the virtual world, and then you cut to a scene and the person's just standing there. Or Sorrento, his rig, he's in a chair. This whole time, he never moves. And it's he would be vomiting the entire time he does that because his body would know he's laying in a chair, and he wouldn't get the physical, his physical movement of his body would not align to what his avatar is doing in the digital world. And it would literally make him vomit. And so there's a whole conundrum there in the movie that I think they do a good job of teaching the user about that at the beginning with these lines about the treadmill. But then again, Spielberg we've bought into the disbelief. We'll throw that out the window. We don't have to worry about that. Yeah. We need to make sure his chair is really freaking cool, regardless if that actually would work in the real world or not. And so, that I found kind of really interesting. But I will say one of the things that I noticed that I thought was brilliant is the shot that they do in the van. And I'm jumping backwards a little bit, but the shot in the beginning when the first time that Wade puts on the VR headset, he puts it on and he slows way down, and the camera swings around and comes right through the side of his head and into the VR goggles. And it does that's one of the best shots of the film, in my opinion, because it makes the viewer, someone who's never worn a VR headset. I hold them and I tell clients all the time, oh, you put it on your face and you're standing in a place, and they're like, what? I don't get it. And so until you put a VR headset on, it is hard to mentally grasp what it is. That shot does it, and it does a very, very good job of it. And so I love that. I noticed that yesterday, again, more than I did in the past, on how I think brilliant that shot was at creating that connection, because that's a hard concept for a lot of people to grasp in reality.
Heck yeah. No, I mean, and if you've never experienced that's one of my big problems of, I want to play some of these games, and I just don't have the space to move around, and the teleportation aspect, I last 5 or 10 minutes before I start feeling super nauseous, and I have to take it off. And so the experiences that don't require you to move around usually pay off a lot better, which is one of the nice things about what we do, which is 360 videos, where we're taking a camera that has 6 cameras on it, and it's capturing, if you imagine a cube, 6-sided cube, right? You put a camera lens on each side of those cubes. Well, now that can represent your head. So any space where you plant this camera down is the camera's stand-in for your head, almost like a time travel aspect. And now whenever you play it back, your head is in the position of where that camera was, and now you can look around all around you, even if you can't necessarily move about the space. But that's okay, because normally, right, we don't usually, and it's not always safe to try to move around if you're not prepared for that kind of thing. And so watching them in the movie run across the street, I was just like, oh, they're gonna get smacked by a car. Like, this isn't good.
Which is a real problem.
Yeah.
They do that shot. It's great in the film where the mom, the kid's like, hey mom, and you look in the background, there's the kitchen's on fire. She's like, go ask your father, and but then she ends up getting shot anyway. And I joke, so it's that at the beginning, Oculus, one of the industry leaders, right, in the VR space, has done a really good job there. They have these really cute safety videos that you watch when you put on the VR headset the first time you set up your digital playground, basically. And they have all these little things where they're like showing people like shooing their cat out the door and shutting the door behind the cat and like putting the kid in the crib. And so they're trying to like, they're trying to solve that problem of like what you said, Wes, is like VR. In a perfect world, the best VR experience would be like, imagine going into like a Costco or Walmart sized warehouse and clearing everything out and just having this baseball or football sized flat surface to go and move around. And that allows us to like physically run, and that would translate into VR. Where right now you can't do that in your living room. At least my living room's not big enough to do a sprint in. And so you trick. We use tricks in VR. Teleportation is one of them. To allow us to get that full immersion, because I think there was a hype cycle with every new technology. There's a hype cycle, right? And there's been a very large hype cycle with virtual reality. Probably one of the reasons that Spielberg pushed this movie when he did. He's very, very smart as a businessman, and so the hype of VR was everybody wanted what we see in Ready Player One, right? Like, I want to go surfing in Hawaii on 80-foot waves with my best friends that are spread out around the globe. Like, that's what we all want to do in VR. We want to ski on the pyramids, right? But you can't. The technology is not there yet. It just isn't. It's incredibly powerful technology, and Wes, you and I have done some really powerful experiences that are changing people's lives for the better. But at the end of the day, it's not there. Like, when we're done with this call, we can't go hop on and go skiing on the pyramids together and have it feel real, right? We're just not there yet. But there was this hype cycle that was promised when VR first came out. It was like, dude, this is what you can do everything, and people got into it, and they were just like, oh, I get sick if I try and stand up off my couch. And so, that is still a real problem in this business. Mm-hmm. And so again, it's really, really powerful technology, but we're still figuring out some of those technical aspects. And there are some interesting tricks that people are figuring out to solve those. But we're nowhere near, from a technology perspective, what Ready Player One is. And just before I jump off this topic, one last thought that I think is just really interesting is, so I made the comment of having like a Costco-sized warehouse. What you can do is you can cheat the brain just a little bit in VR. So imagine you have a cube, right? And you want to walk, or if you have a hallway, let's go back to Doom, right? So in Doom, one of the best, early video, like first-person shooters, is you would just walk down hallways and open doorways and shoot monsters and Nazis, and that was basically it. And so if you imagine that concept of you're going through these endless levels of Doom, if you map that out, you would need a couple of football fields to physically walk that space in a VR experience. However, we can cheat a little bit and not make you sick. And so they've figured out, and I forget what the industry's kind of saying now, but if you imagine something like a 20 by 20 yard cube, so it's still pretty big space, we can cheat a right angle to be like 80 degrees or like 110 degrees, and your brain will still think it's a right angle depending on if it looks like a right angle in the game, but as you turn, that the world actually spins a little bit quicker and actually turns you like 120 degrees. And so you can actually, they've done tests where you can actually get people to think that they have walked. They'll take a VR headset off and say, like, how far do you think you've traveled? You're like, oh, I must be like 100 or 200 feet from where I started. They take the headset off, they're standing right back where they began. And so that's this really interesting phenomenon where you can, again, start to like trick the user's brain. And so anyway, that's a whole nother rabbit hole to go down.
It's called spatial awareness, and we have none of it. Without our sight, we have zero spatial awareness. I mean, coming from someone who like would go swim, for miles, if I didn't have a sight, right? Like when I would do my races, if I couldn't see where I was going, I'm off into nowhere. Even though I feel like I'm swimming directly straight, there's no way in hell without seeing that I could do that.
And what's funny,
right, but you can feel the water moving, right?
That's you can feel the water moving.
And that's the difference between, I think, that, Todd, and VR. Is in VR we don't have the sense of the water, right? And so our bodies, if we're trying to move without the sense of the water, aka without our feet on the ground or something like that, then our brain goes, oh, something's wrong, and then you get sick.
Got it.
But anyway, that's interesting because you're right. I'm watching The Expanse right now, and they do a good job of that where they tell people the first time you go out in outer space, they're like, do not look in the stars. Make sure you look down at your feet. And then they don't really explain that. And then they keep saying that, and you're like, oh, you get disoriented. You don't know which way is up. You'll get lost swimming in the ocean of space. Wow. And so it was just like, it's the same conundrum of, we orientate ourselves to the world. We're in Austin right now having this, we're in Austin West. And so I remember when I first moved to Austin, I got so lost because I grew up on the coast and you always had a mountain in the distance. So you'd be like, oh, that way's east. Yeah. And it took a really long time for me to figure out how to tell directions without a visual marker because we don't have any, visual kind of
cues here. Yeah.
There.
And what's funny about that too is, talking about how bad we are at spatial awareness is funny when you're also thinking about how good we are at proprioception, right? The ability to know where our body is in relation to itself and within space. And yet, whenever you disconnect anything not our body, we get really bad really quick.
Or if you close your eyes, your proprioception gets way worse instantly unless you train it. Right. And that's what I meant, I think, really about like the swimming is that I can feel like I'm swimming straight. I could bet you $100 I am. And I absolutely am not. Unless I've trained myself to be able to do that over long periods of time, right? And I mean, it would probably be similar in something like VR where you would have to do it so much and in a certain way to train your body to actually know that's 120 degrees, that's not 90 degrees, or that's 80 degrees, that's not 90 degrees, or whatever. Why you would do that, I don't know. But this leads me to a question for you, Ricky, which is my son has been beating me up to get a VR system, and they're so expensive, but I really want to do it for him because he's super interested in it. And they seem really cool. I mean, is it something that I should think about doing for him? He's 8. He's kind of little, or is it something where like, oh no, I think in like 5 years, the technology is going to be totally different.
The technology itself has come a long ways in the last 3 years. We'll get back to him being an 8-year-old in a second, but and I know Wes has feelings about the content side of things, which we'll get to, but the technology, the early days, again, this overpromise of VR, you had to have a really expensive computer, so minimum like $2,000. You were tied to it, literally. You had a cable that you were trying not to fall over, and then you'd have to also put external sensors around your room. And so that's a pain in the ass to set all that stuff up, and it's expensive, and like, who the hell wants to do that to play a shitty game? Like, no one after the excitement wears off. The new VR systems, and when we're talking about consumer stuff, Oculus owns the market. That's really the only thing you can buy. An Oculus Quest 2 is $300. They come in like the size of a shoebox, and they're super easy. Oculus has fixed it's hard to use VR problem. They have external cameras on the headset, and so when it's really fascinating to set up the VR headset the first time. You put it on and you start looking around your room, which looks like you're looking through like 1980s TV technology. It's really grainy and black and white. And then you see the system start mapping, creating like a matrix-looking map of your room or of your kitchen or of your basement. And then you draw a line where you want your play space to be, and that's it. Boom, you're in. You're in the Oasis at that point. It's that easy to set up. And they've even gotten so good now, whereas if somebody walks, so if you decide to take over the VR headset, because you will inevitably from your 8-year-old, when they walk into it, it'll tell you like, hey, there's an object here, and it turns those cameras back on. And so all of a sudden you can see that your 8-year-old kid is standing there with a cupcake or something, right? And so the technology has really gotten pretty good. And so the Oculus Quest 2 is it's a Facebook device, and you have to log on. You have to have a Facebook account to use it. So that's a different that's a different whole different thing to open. I see you shaking your head, right? And then there's also some things that a lot of people don't talk about with VR and this is like a sad truth in terms of the consumer side, is that those cameras that are scanning your room to like allow you to do these amazing experiences, Facebook owns that data. And so they're tracking what the inside of your house looks like. And now there's rules about what they can and can't do with that, but we've seen how Facebook, does data stuff. But the point there is, the cool part and the downside part is their goal is to literally map the world in 3D. And that way, like, if you want to go into another space, it would exist. Or if my headset knows what Todd's house looks like and Todd's headset knows what my house looks like, now we can have really, really intimate, interesting dual player experiences. And so there is a really interesting benefit that comes with that, but it's also kind of scary. With that said, we probably all have an Alexa in our house who's listening to every damn word we say.
Damn
so
right.
the privacy situation is a totally different conundrum. The other consideration, the headsets are great. And this, I know, Wes he's still waiting for that game, I know, to come out. I could see him smiling and nodding, right? Is the content is just not it's lacking. It can be good. There's some really amazing games out there that'll keep you interested, but it's like we're back into like Nintendo 1 days in terms of the depth of content. And so there's not a lot. My nephew's 11, has a VR headset, and he plays it in spurts because he gets really into games for a while, but the games are so short that he's just like, okay, like I'm used to playing video games that last for months, before I finish them or whatever. And this is like, well, I beat this in 4 hours. And now what do I do?
Gotcha.
And the games are still $50 a piece.
Ooh.
And so, there's definitely, anyway, Oculus Quest 2 is great. There's some really, really fun games. And what we discovered during the pandemic, last thing, is they can be a phenomenal way to work out. There's been a huge uptick in people using VR systems as an alternative to working out. And so you burn a lot of calories doing like Beat Sabers one, where you basically have like lightsabers.
Oh,
and you
yeah, I've
hit
seen that.
blocks to music. And you turn that on like medium and do it for 10 minutes and you will be standing in a pool of sweat. And so there's like a really fun boxing one where you like I think it's called Mike. It's basically like a really modern version of Mike Tyson Punch Out, we'll call it.
Oh
That's
my
how it's
gosh.
named. But I remember
Do
the
they have
first
like the
time
tactile sensing? Do I feel Tyson punching
You
me?
can. I've tried those suits, and all they do is shock you, and so it's just
geez.
it's kind of annoying.
That's
it's
awful.
But they're a great way to like, it's like, all right, go downstairs and play VR for 20 minutes, aka like burn some energy.
Wow.
And so
Okay.
yeah, the technology's gotten really good. The software and content side is still playing catch up, but it's very, very expensive to build them because of like right now, if we're going to recreate me in a film or in a digital world, it's all you have to see as a user is this. In VR, I have to be able to let the user go back here and pick up these books and take my headphones off and look behind me, and just the amount of data
Oh man, yeah.
that you need, because you're rendering a complete 3D world. And even 2D video games, the way that they render those worlds, you're not actually rendering out a 3-dimensional world. It's a 2D replica of a 3-dimensional world. And so some of these VR games are really big. There's a really beautiful VR experience that's it's a Jurassic Park thing. It's like 7 minutes long, and I think it's like 15 gigabits of it's huge. It's a huge file to download this thing that's like 7 minutes long.
Wow.
And so like, it's like, oh, you want to watch this new VR film? It's an hour and a half. Great. It's a half a terabyte. So get downloading. And so it's anyway, I can keep going. There's other things. But yeah.
No,
Quest 2.
that's great info because I've been on the fence for a while. So
Yeah.
Nice. Anything else you want to point out about 360 filmmaking? Like one of the things, there's a lot of rundown stuff that we give clients as we're either pitching or going into production, things that they need to be aware of, or best practices that, hey, here's how this is going to work. Like for me as a director, those things aren't usually stuff that I'm overly concerned about. The stuff that I like, because if I'm working with an actor, the type of performance for 360 video is very different from the type of performance you get for traditional 2D, right? Because in traditional 2D, you get coverage. You can cut to a close-up for the big emotional moment, or you can stay wide in order to establish your scene. Whenever you're shooting in VR or 360, you're not really doing any of that. A scene takes place usually from one angle. Now, in special circumstances, we might cheat that a little bit, but normally we stay in one big angle, and what you're trying to do is perform almost like performing for a play, a theater, right? Where you're going a little bit bigger. You're staging the blocking a little bit differently because you're staging it around the camera like you almost would for an audience member. And so all those things, take finessing and they're different if you're not used to directing, 360. It's an experience that it requires a lot of thought and foresight, not just in the blocking, but also in how you compose your image, because of some technical reasons. You don't want to necessarily run around the camera, just because it creates a fun visual. You also have to think about the process that goes into it after you're done shooting. Like editing is very different and in some ways convoluted, and in other ways much more simple. Yeah, feel free to chime in on any of that 1,000 things I just said.
Oh, I was going to say that's how much time do we have left? Because and so yeah, it's I was thinking about that, Wes, because as you know, we're working through post-production on a project right now that it's relatively simple in terms of what is the end result for the client. It's like a documentary style thing, and so you shoot it and you have what you have and you slice it up and that's it. And so one of the things that I realized, with our first round of feedback, the client basically saw our footage and came back and was like, "Oh my God, this isn't what we had in mind." And they had all these concerns, which are valid. And it's a very short timeline. So, when you're pushing on a tight timeline, that always makes things trickier. But is to think about, 360 filmmaking is as similar to 2D as it is different. And you do, there's a bunch of things that you really have to reconsider. And part of that is what you were saying, Wes, like actor performance, camera placement, how you light your scene, right? If we're shooting in 360 and we can see everything, well, where the hell do you put your lights? Where do you put your gaffers? Where do you put your, where do you put that stuff? Where do you put your C-stand with your microphone on it? You can't. Or you're going to be up shit creek without a paddle, as they say when it comes to being in post. And so there's a lot of different, there's a lot of different aspects that you have to consider when you do that. And I think, that's probably the simplest way to say it is you have to be willing to reconsider what you know about storytelling and filmmaking when you shoot in 360, because otherwise you don't get a good product. And I'll pick on a local filmmaker a little bit. Robert Rodriguez did what could have been such a good VR piece a couple years ago, and it was a really high budget piece, and it makes you incredibly sick incredibly quickly. And I don't think that he took 5 minutes to do research on what the industry standard VR practices. Like something you never did. One of the goals of 360 video and VR is you give autonomy to the user. So for instance, there's this great shot in the film where you're in a fight and this woman stabs you in the stomach. And what does every single person do when they get stabbed in the stomach? They're going to go, ugh, and they're going to look down at their belly, right? And that head movement, that physical head movement in VR is what creates that feeling where you're like, oh my God, I'm being stabbed. Robert Rodriguez forced the camera. He rotated the camera 90 degrees right when that stab happened. So as a user, when you look down, all of a sudden you're staring at your neck. And it was just like, and you had to physically lift your head back up and look straight ahead. And all of a sudden you're staring at your stomach. And it was just like, well, who the hell thought that was a good idea? And so there's a lot of shots like that in that film where it was like, okay, you're a brilliant story, Rodriguez, and you're great at that. But you did not reconsider how to tell a story in VR, and you blew it. And so anyway, that's maybe my best way to answer that question without without laying out a list of 10 things here over the next 20 minutes. But is that it's just a new kind of where we started. It's a new type of storytelling and it's a new type of filmmaking. And I think that you have to be willing to reconsider some of the norms. I know that I see you doing that, Wes, when we're working together. Your brains, you're like, okay, how's this going to work in VR? And you just have to recalculate how your brain works. And that's also what makes this industry fun and makes this medium fun, is that we get to recreate some of these things and we get to try new things. One of our last projects, we did this transition where we go from a 2D screen, so it looks like you're watching a big screen TV in a VR headset, and all of a sudden it turns into 360, and how do you do that? And we didn't know if that was going to play, right? And so we did this really fun transition where that 2D screen basically just envelops your head, and it worked, and it works really well. And so anyway, that was something where we were like, well, we've never seen this done. Like, and we just pitched it to the client. We're like, yeah, we can do this, no problem, of course. And so
That's brilliant.
Classic, right?
Yeah.
And then we tested it, right? We built this thing out in After Effects and tried it, and we were like, oh wow, this actually works kind of good. And we even kicked it around on this last project that we're working on currently, where we're going to do it reverse, right? We were going to take the 360 world and we were going to shrink it back down into a 2D screen to focus on a really, really important message that a doctor's going to deliver. And we ended up going a different route, but it was just, again, it was fun. It was like, okay, we have to think of an entirely new way to tell a visual story here, and thinking about, how does that affect the end user? How is that going to play in a headset? Is that going to make people uncomfortable? Does it hold up? I mean, just anyway. So there's rules, if you will, in the 360 and VR space, and I'm sure we'll continue to redefine them and break them as we build these experiences out.
Nice. Awesome. I think that pretty much covers all of that. I'm curious, did you bring a recommendation for our audience?
A recommendation?
Yeah, a recommendation for the week.
Yeah, so we recommend either a movie or a restaurant or, I don't know, a book, whatever it is you're into. If you like,
okay.
I can go first if
yeah,
you need time. Oh, you're good.
No. I just have to think of the name. So Ready Player One is a fantastic VR. Ready Player One, movie's pretty good. We already beat that one up pretty good. The book is great, especially if you were born anytime in the late 70s, the 80s, or the 90s. You'll probably really love Ready Player One. It's a fast read. Take it like on vacation. Read it on the airplane. It's a feel-good book. However, there's another VR book called Snow Crash, and that is a much more adult, a darker, more interesting world. And if somebody out there, some filmmaker out there wanted to try and one up Spielberg and redo another VR movie, like remaking Snow Crash would be really interesting, because it to me, it's a more realistic approach of what the maybe the future of our world holds, and VR. And so yeah, check out Snow Crash. It's a denser read, and it's a little heavier, but it's probably my favorite VR story that's out there.
Nice.
Awesome. I'm going to check it out.
Todd, what do you got?
Yeah, I'm going to recommend probably, I have so many favorite Spielberg films, honestly, because, I sit here and I shit on one of the greats and I feel not good about it. But so I want to recommend a movie that it was basically my introduction to Spielberg as a director, to like movies that I thought, you know what, this is bigger than this moment of me watching this. This is something, and I watched it pretty early on, not right when it came out. It was before my time, but I'm going to recommend Jaws, which I'm surprised that we haven't recommended that before. Not only is it timeless for me because of the music and because the music itself is timeless, but the sense of tension that you get, not just from the music, but from like the positions that you're put in. I love all these. I love films they force you to live in a space, right? We are forced to live on this boat, on these moments, and there's nowhere else you can go, and you are trapped there with these characters, and it's just so great. And there's also this air of like, the music is very whimsical at times, which feels so strange. If you go back and watch it, it's like, why is this like happy major key music right now? I should be scared. But I don't know. The dichotomy with that and the ominous da-na just actually heightens those moments. So yeah, Jaws is one of the greats for me.
Nice.
You guys can see me on the video here. I'm looking down at my phone, and so I just had to Google, because I had to go through and remind myself of all of the movies that Spielberg has made.
Oh yeah.
And there's so many great films in here, and so I was just like, oh yeah, I was like, oh, I forgot he did that. I forgot he did that. And so anyway, that is Spielberg is
I find myself doing that every time we do a Spielberg film because I'm like, I need a reminder of how badass this guy is. Oh yeah, he's the best. Yeah.
It's so
You
good.
know, and just stuff. And I know it's time your recommendation, Wes, but just the breadth that he has between serious stuff and fun popcorn, movies. They're just anyway.
Staggering.
Very, very, very good filmmaker.
Nice. I am going to double down on Ready Player One, the book. So that's my official recommendation. You'll find links to all three of these. Of course, we'll put a trailer for Jaws and a link to Snow Crash and Ready Player One novels so that you can go read what this story could have been.
Awesome.
And stay tuned for next week. We're going to start our Halloween festivities with October. We traditionally do a lot of horror films, and we're going to be covering Let the Right One In, the original movie. So stay tuned for that. And if you're enjoying the show, don't forget to subscribe, review us on iTunes, leave us a note. If there's something you want us to cover or talk about, you can do that. And if you want to comment on this episode in particular, you can do that at thepestlepodcast.com/ReadyPlayer1.
And our quote of the day that we'll leave you with is from Shigeru Miyamoto. A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad. I love that because I think that it doesn't just go with games, obviously. I think it's just for a lot of, creative stuff. I mean, at some point it has to be, you have to let it go, right? Yeah. But, there's stories of artists who've taken years to, a musician who takes years to make an album and it turns out to be this incredible thing. And sometimes things happen fast, but sometimes they happen slow. And I think that just putting something out for the sake of putting it out is definitely a recipe for disaster for sure.
Absolutely. So for those not familiar, Shigeru, or I think he's affectionately known as Shigs, he's the mastermind at Nintendo who created Mario and The Legend of Zelda and a bunch of other stuff that you know and love. Those two being obviously the crown jewels. But that quote is just so good for all the reasons you just said, Todd. But then even as you were talking, something jogged my memory, which was unintentional on my part, but perfect, because E.T., right, directed by Spielberg, was considered to be the biggest flop maybe ever as far as video games go, because that was developed for Atari. They didn't realize, I think, E.T. the movie was going to be such a smash, and then when they realized it, they were like, let's rush through a video game in time for Christmas so that the sales will be incredible, and so they did. They rushed it. It was garbage, and it took up a lot of landfill space, quite literally, because of all the unpurchased E.T. Atari games out there. And it just goes to show, everyone's going to be pissed at you for delaying a game. And Shigeru knows that as much as anybody, because The Legend of Zelda is historically delayed. We're waiting
even
on
now.
Even now, it never stops.
Yes.
If it hasn't been delayed yet, then they're not serious about releasing it. That's the way you need to view that. If it hasn't been delayed, it's not time yet. And so he knows better than anybody. Don't rush it. People will eventually forgive you for a delayed game because then it's going to be good. Whereas if you put it out, then it's just going to be trashed and it's never going to recover from that.
Yeah. Great point. Great point. Anything else to add, Ricky? How you feeling, man? It was a long one. It was good though.
Yeah, that was. I appreciate you guys having me on. That was really interesting. I've been watching you guys rack up the episodes for quite a long time. So this is my first time, getting to jump in and geek out with you guys. And so thank you very much. It was a pleasure. And maybe in a couple of years, if someone builds Snow Crash, we can get back on and talk some more.
Episode 320.
Yeah, that's right.
There you go.
Dude, I can't believe it's taken this long to get you on, but thank you so much for all the insight, man. It's been a blessing talking to you for real. That's it. Thank you guys so much for watching, or if you're on YouTube or listening, if otherwise, make sure to join us next week. We're going to be doing Let the Right One In. Watch it before. We don't want to spoil anything, and leave us a comment. Tell us what you want us to review. We love talking about all kinds of movies. So until then, I am Todd.
I'm Wes.
I'm Ricky.
Go watch some movies.
Bye.